Exercise 21 reads that a scuba diver is at an elevation of negative 38 feet. The diver starts moving at a rate of negative 12 feet per minute. Identify an inequality that represents the number of minutes, x, it will take the diver to reach an elevation deeper than negative 200 feet. So we've got a lot of information on this one, we've got three different numbers, we've got some rates, we've got a variable. So I think for me, what I like to do is I like to highlight my numbers. Anytime I see a number, I want to make sure I circle it, underline it, box it, whatever, but I always want to make sure that I keep those numbers in mind, because I'm probably going to have to use all of them. Now, the first piece of information that we're given is that the scuba diver begins at an elevation of negative 38 feet. So we're going to put that begins at negative 38 feet. And then we're also given that the diver starts moving at a rate of negative 12 feet per minute. So, and we can think of rate as speed. That would actually be velocity would be the proper term, but you can think about it as speed of negative 12 feet per minute. And then we want to identify an inequality that represents the number of minutes, x. So what does x represent? Number of minutes that have passed. So x represents time. It will take the diver to reach an elevation deeper than negative 200 feet. So that negative 200 feet, that's our goal, is to be less. We want our elevation to be less than or deeper. So less than or deeper, both have the same meaning here, negative 200 feet. So 4 pieces of information. We got to make sure we're using those 4 pieces of information properly. I think the first thing that I would do in this case is I would actually draw out the scenario. So here's my beautiful ocean. And we call sea level, if you recall from a couple of weeks back, we call sea level 0 feet. So where the ocean is, that's 0 feet. Mountains above the ocean, we call that positive elevation. Anything below the ocean, we call it a negative elevation. And the scuba diver begins at negative 38 feet. So if the top of the ocean is 0 feet, negative 38 feet means that he's already within the water to some depth. And we want to get to something below negative 200 feet. So that's our goal, is to be below negative 200 feet. Well, if we're beginning at negative 38 feet, we also know that we're moving at a velocity of negative 12 feet per minute. So we got to ask ourselves, why is it that that velocity is negative 12 feet per minute rather than a positive 12 feet per minute? What does that mean? Well, because it's negative, and because we were talking about how being underneath the water means in the negative values, what that negative velocity means, or that negative rate, is that you're moving downwards. So you're moving down into the ocean, you're diving deeper, and it makes sense because it's a scuba diver, is diving deeper negative 12 feet per minute. So every minute that passes by, and that's what x is, x represents the number of minutes, the diver goes deeper 12 feet. So, for example, if he starts at negative 38, here's your diver, starts at negative 38, after 1 minute, that diver is now at 12 feet lower. Now he's at negative 50 feet underneath the ocean. And as the time goes by, he goes deeper and deeper and deeper. But we want to know, what does x have to equal so that the value of the depth that he is, so how deep he is less than negative 200 feet. And then I also just want to point out quickly that if this was a positive 12 feet per minute, we would be moving up. Positive 12 feet means that we would be moving up. And then if we went above 0 feet, it would mean that we're actually soaring into the sky. So kind of like a dolphin or a whale does. So now, using that information, and now that we've drawn out the scenario, really thought about that a bit, which of these 4 inequalities is going to represent that situation? Which of them is going to give us, identify an inequality that represents the number of x minutes it will take the diver to reach an elevation deeper than negative 200 feet? And we talked about how deeper than negative 200 feet means that we have a goal of being less than negative 200 feet. Not less than or equal to, we just want to be deeper than it. We don't want to be deeper or at negative 200 feet. So it means that likely we're going to need to use one of these 3 variables. So I can automatically cancel out this third one because I don't want to be greater than 200 feet. I want to be deeper than 200 feet, negative 200 feet. Also notice how this is the only positive number. But we don't want to be in the positive 200 feet. We want to be in the negative 200 feet, and we want to be below that. So this one is just out of it. Now, we have in the three of these, the x value is being multiplied by either a positive 12 or a negative 12. So if the x value is being multiplied by the rate, because like we said, for every minute that passes by, we are going down negative 12 feet, that means that we want negative 12 times x. And so this first answer right here, this 12 times x, that's a positive 12 times x. And we said that if it was a positive rate, that means that we would be going up, but we're going down. So that's kind of my clue that this is not going to be one of my answers. I don't want a positive 12x, I want a negative 12x, which I have for the other two inequalities. Even though this is minus 12, that 12 we consider positive, if we do a keep change, this is a plus negative 12. And then over on this other one, we also have a negative 12. So both of those are still valid answers. Now, the last piece of information that we haven't used for this inequality, we used the 200, the negative 200. We talked about the x and the negative 12. But what about this 38? Notice how this 38 over here is a positive 38, while this 38 over here is a negative 38. Do we want to begin at a positive 38, or do we want to begin at a negative 38? Well, because we began underneath the water, we began at a negative value. We began at negative 38 feet. So that is the final part to the puzzle, is that we need to begin at a negative 38 feet, not a positive 38 feet, because that would be above the water if we were at a positive 38 feet. And the only one that has a negative is the final solution. This fourth one here is the only one that makes sense to our scenario. So let me erase all this mess and explain why that one makes sense again. So this one makes the most sense because we want to have negative 12 multiplied by the x being the number of minutes that have passed by, and we're multiplying it by negative 12 because we're going down into the ocean. So we're going deeper into the ocean, which means that we're going more negative in our distance from the ocean, if that hopefully makes sense to you. And then we want a minus 38 instead of a plus 38 because we began 38 feet underneath the water, and that minus 38 is the same thing as plus negative 38. That represents our initial position. So we began at negative 38 feet, just like the question tells us. And we want to be less than negative 200 feet because we want to reach an elevation deeper than negative 200 feet. Deeper means to be lower than. So we want to be less than negative 200 feet. And so that's the only one of the four inequalities that gives us the proper a proper setup to what we're being explained in our scenario. And then the final part is that it wants a solution to that inequality. So in order to find that solution, you just treat that like a two-step inequality. You don't have to do the keep change for that part. I was just showing it to demonstrate that this would be a negative depth, but you don't have to do a keep change. Instead, you just treat it like a two-step inequality and get your solution. What does the solution represent? Let's say x is less than, or let's say x is greater than, this is just an example, this isn't the answer. Let's say x is greater than 5. Then that means the number of minutes that have passed by, that's what represents x, has to be greater than 5 in order for us to be below negative 200 feet. So if 2, 3, or 4 minutes had passed by, even 5 minutes had passed by, then we wouldn't have reached our goal. But as long as it's greater than 5, then we'll be underneath negative 200 feet, and we'll just keep going deeper and deeper with our negative rate. But again, that's not a solution to this problem. That's just an example.